Thank you, Ms. Roy, and congratulations. My name is Lowell Bergman. I'm the professor of the Riva and David Logan Professor of actually investigative reporting at the university here at Berkeley. I'm stepping in for Charles Ferguson, who's on your program, who sends his regrets from overseas where he's working on another film. And by the way, I'm part of the Canadian infiltration in part. I have to confess, I'm a former landed immigrant and assistant professor at the University of Saskatchewan. Very cold place. I'm not a former resident of the IHouse, but I think I'm here primarily because I'm a representative of the greater journalism, greater academic community here at Berkeley, and of course I've interacted here over the years. Our next honorees really need no introduction, not only because their bios are in your program, but also because most of you are familiar with their recent, if not entirely accurate, apparently, something I'm also familiar with in Hollywood, depiction in the Oscar-winning film Argo. But before I have the chance to speak with them, with Ken and Patricia Taylor, I want to, as the IHouse Couple of the Year, I'd like to welcome an IHouse resident, Ich-Wan Wang, from another Ottawa, Canada, of course, a law student who has the honor of formally presenting their recognition. Ich-Wan.
Thank you, Mr. Bergman, and thank you everyone for taking time out of your busy days to join us. It's a pleasure to be part of this special evening with each and every one of you and this wonderful IHouse celebration of Canada. Would you agree, exactly as Chancellor Berchneau and Ms. Roy have remarked, what a happy synchronicity. The MasterCard Foundation, our very own Chancellor Berchneau, and one half of our IHouse Alumni Couple of the Year all hail from Canada. Pretty great, eh? Now, everyone, before we welcome our honorees, please allow me to invite you, in true Canadian bilingual tradition, in English et en français. I know you've been yearning to purchase your raffle tickets to Paris, so please, if you have that urge, dépêchez-vous and alert our friendly staff coming around to collect your tickets. Bonne chance tout le monde. Alors, distinguished guests, as you have given us the honor as IHouse residents to join us in our home tonight, when you came in, you may have noticed the inscribed bricks out in our cafe patio. You may have even caught a glimpse of the one that Ken and Pat Taylor inscribed here many years ago. The one that read, "Hooray for breakfast," in October 1958. Now, why would they hooray breakfast? So here's the secret. It was exactly over breakfast in 1958 here at IHouse at 7 a.m. when they were the only two people in the dining hall. So everyone be early birds is the lesson that Australian-born Patricia, of Chinese descent, working her own way through her doctorate in bacteriology, minding her own business, and then she met Ken, Canadian-born, a student in Haas MBA. And Ken just thought Patricia's amazing scientific knowledge, as well as her dedication and achievements in both violin and ballet, were just stunning. And he remarked, "I thought there were 3 or 4 of her." And then the rest is history. Their time here at IHouse cemented not only a remarkable partnership, enjoying 55 years and going on strong, but also their remarkable partnership is one steeped in the courageous conviction in the international principles of fellowship that lie at the core of the IHouse mission. So before we hear from Mr. Bergman in their wonderful chat about the adventures of the Taylors since IHouse, please join me in warmly welcoming them to the stage. idea. Good idea. Wonderful, wonderful. Oh, sure, or maybe we can. Pat's always way ahead of the game. It's hard to keep up with her. Yes. Ambassador Ken and Dr. Patricia Taylor, it's a great honor on behalf of all IHouse residents to confer to you this framed compilation of your original application photos. So these are the mugshots. This is the evidence. And you see that everyone is not laughing at you, but we're all laughing with you. And also bearing on this plaque is an inscription that will be mirrored in a wonderful IHouse bench or love seat in the cafe patio in your honor. And it reads, I'm proud to say, 2013 International House Alumni Couple of the Year, Ambassador Ken and Dr. Patricia Taylor, IHouse 1958, Courageous Heroes in Iran 1979, and lifelong champions for a world of greater understanding. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you. And now please join me in inviting Mr. Bergman to chat with the Taylors as we enjoy their conversation. Thank you very much.
I thought, although the questions say to start with Hollywood, I thought that initially the way to start was you met here. You, in a sense, came together here. Why did you stay so closely associated with the IHouse all these years and promote it over the years?
Well,
why was it so important?
because our meeting really set the tone of our whole life together. Sorry, is that better? Our meeting at breakfast really set the tone for the rest of our lives. Ken was on his way to play golf with his friends, and I was on my way to a German class, which was, at that time was part of the PhD candidacy, and after that I was going to work. And on our first posting in Guatemala, Ken dropped me off at work at the Institute of Nutrition, Central America and Panama, while he went off to play golf with the English ambassador. But in the middle of the morning, I was on the roof of the INCAP building, and the superintendent and I watched planes flying over, dropping bombs, and fires starting up, particularly around the palace. So I tried to call the golf club to alert Ken, but there was no answer. But sure enough, at the designated time, our car pulled up to INCAP, and out came Ken, gleefully saying, "Wow, wasn't that a good rehearsal of the Air Force for Air Force Week, which was to start the next day?" But I told him it was not a rehearsal, that was real, it was a real thing, and that people had to go home because there was an immediate curfew and everyone wanted to be with his families. He said, "You know, I wondered, the ambassador and I wondered about that because we arrived at the clubhouse and we couldn't find anyone to give us our usual after-game coffee and cookies. So we had to leave and I came to pick you up." So that's why.
But I won't give a rebuttal, but I think that's indicative of my early diplomatic insight.
Oh, well, maybe I can provoke you now. I mean, so there's been a lot more interest in you since the Academy Awards. There's been a lot more interest since Argo. How have the Americans once more exploited the Canadians in the representation of history?
Well, I think in response to that, Canadians are not an imperialistic country. And what we're
Depends
doing
on who
tonight,
you're talking to. But.
what we're doing tonight is stealthily taking over first the West Coast, and then we'll work on from there. But I think that, again, Lowell, in answer to your first question, is in a sense, coming to IHouse is like a first diplomatic posting. Say that this was Canberra, say that it was Cairo or what have you, and you had 86 embassies. Well, here maybe you have up to 50 or 60 citizens from different countries. So in a sense, when you come to IHouse, it's almost as if you are visiting a capital city and meeting your diplomatic colleagues who are from east, west, north, and south. So there's an international, once you come to IHouse, I think you live with an international understanding that is almost unique or impossible to get elsewhere. And then maybe turning to Hollywood, the movie I found quite exciting. I said to Pat, boy, something's going on here. And then, as I mentioned to a group yesterday, Pat turned to me and said as she watched the movie, "Did we get out okay?"
What's your movie review?
Well, in the middle of the movie, like a lot of you, because it was a good action-type movie. I was sitting on the edge of the seat, biting my nails, and thinking, I wonder what's going to happen to the Taylors and to the 6 American diplomats.
But could I say, Lowell, you pose a good question. I would have preferred, rather than based on a true story, if it would have said based loosely on a true story. Again, I think we should be careful not to confuse Hollywood with history. The story is one, I think, which reflects a point of view of an initiative primarily from the United States. Clearly, Canada enjoyed working with the CIA, with the State Department, to get their 6 diplomats home. But essentially, from a Canadian perspective, we appreciated the help from the CIA.
Well, with that, I think we have queued up a clip for people to see. It's an interview.
You've seen Argo, I take it.
Yeah, I have.
How accurate is it from your memory?
The only thing I would say was that 90% of the contributions to the ideas and the consummation of the plan was Canadian. And the movie gives almost full credit to the American CIA. And with that exception, the movie is very good. But Ben Affleck's character in the film was only in Tehran a day and a half. And the main hero, in my opinion, was Ken Taylor, who was a Canadian ambassador who orchestrated the entire process. I was informed about it the first day, and I was very much involved with the Canadian government because the Canadian government would not legally permit 6 false passports to be issued. So the Canadian Parliament had to go into secret session the first time in history, and they voted to let us use 6 Canadian passports that were false.
But when you first heard about this outlandish plan to create a fictitious science fiction movie to get these hostages out, you're the President of the United States. I mean, if this had gone badly wrong, you would have been an absolute laughingstock. So it's a bold moment for you, for the presidency, for the country.
Well, I don't deny that, but it was much bolder for the Canadian government to do it because the Canadian government was not involved in the hostage crisis, as you know.
So it took a bunch of bonkers Canadians to think up this plan?
Well, I think Canadians, one way or the other, we live in a storybook-type land. And to create the story is essentially the basis of it was that the U.S. diplomats would become Canadians. Now, some of you may view that as a challenge. I'm not too sure. I think certainly the border is an unusual one. Certainly myself coming from Canada to the U.S., it was an opportunity I sought. And from Pat's viewpoint, in fact, Pat came back to the United States twice. and again found the country, of course, friendly and integral to whatever academic success we had. But the movie itself is based primarily, from our point of view, on the 6 leaving as Canadians. What they were doing as Canadians in Tehran, to us, didn't strike us as too important. So Ottawa prepared documentation. And if you look in your pockets, what do you have in your pocket? You have a credit card, primarily MasterCharge. You have some identification papers. You have your business cards. You don't carry around your university diploma if you did go to university, but it's on record. You also have addresses. You have relatives listed. So it becomes a change of identity, not a lost identity in this case, but gaining a Canadian identity. And that all came from Ottawa. So the 6 diplomats were prepared to leave whatever their cover story was. The other aspect of the movie, I think, is that there was some agitation, or they got impatient, but Pat was very good with respect to the 2 of us at home, and made it as if they were just house guests who decided to stay past the first night.
When Ken called me at work, I was at the Iranian National, it's not national now, the Iranian Blood Transfusion Service. He just said, oh, we have some guests staying. But he didn't tell me how long, so I said, well, just get the staff to make them comfortable, and I'll be home at the usual time. So I arrived home, and it was normal. I thought that people were going to stay for a couple of days, as usual. But when the first month went by, and one of the staff, now I think they might have been suspicious, but they didn't know really. So one of the staff that we had in the house came, you know, ma'am, you told me that these were Canadian tourists, but they won't go out when I invite them to various places in the city that I offer to show them. And of course, I had to quickly think and say, oh, well, you know, they're very tired. They've been traveling in Iran, and so they're here, and they want to rest. So that satisfied him. And then when it came to be 2 months, another staff member came and said, you know, they don't have any clothes. They came here with so few clothes, and I found some of your clothes in their laundry basket. So another quick think. And I said, oh, well, they're traveling light, because if they have to go all over the country, they don't want to be carrying bags with them. So they accepted that, although it didn't sound too truthful, but they accepted it, and I think they may have talked about it amongst themselves. But when they were questioned after we left, they had nothing to tell the Revolutionary Guards who came to see them, except the stories that I had told them. So they were okay.
Did they pay a price?
No. One of them immigrated, I think, either to Canada and joined one of the food chains, like McDonald's or somewhere. Another one is still in Iran, and he is working for one of the embassies there, has continued to work, and there have been no repercussions. And certainly none of them went to Iraq, as the movie stated. Also, we didn't have any women on the staff. They were all men, and there were 4 or 5 of them.
In Maclean's, you criticized that there was the film for being too black and white in terms of how it described the Iranian that you knew.
Yes, I think that in the preamble, which was necessary for the movie, that it set the date, of course, during revolutionary times, and the depiction of the Iranians demonstrating during a revolution isn't necessarily, I don't think, reflects the true character of the country and its citizens. We found ourselves in Tehran with many friends, many loyal friends, There's certainly two sides to a country, one during a revolution and one during normal times. And the reflection of those during a revolution, I don't think, is a true characterization, particularly in this case, of the Iranians. And unfortunately, I think that has continued over the years, over the last 33 years, that there really, other than what is portrayed popularly, is that there's depth and character to the Iranians which isn't necessarily and fairly reflected at the moment.
I found I was the only foreigner working at both institutes that I was at, the Pasteur Institute and the Transfusion Service. And I found my Iranian colleagues to be very generous. I received one day a threatening letter. This was after our son, Douglas, had come from his boarding school in France to visit us. And the letter said, your only son and your husband will suffer if you stay, and also the blood transfusion service would be blown up. Well, the letter sort of took me aback for a few seconds, and then I went to the director and showed it to him. He immediately got all my colleagues together, all my scientific colleagues together, and they went through the whole of the transfusion service, looking at every single typewriter that was there, and identified the specific one that was used for typing this letter. Then the director talked to me again and said, look, don't worry. It was typed by a disgruntled nurse, and we've had this sort of problem with her before. And I think he must have talked to her, because after that, the blood center wasn't blown up. Douglas and Ken survived okay. And so I think he talked to her. Ken did tell Ottawa about the letter, and they immediately suggested I evacuate. So I did evacuate for 2 days, but I went back to Tehran after that. And then the other thing that shows the generosity of spirit of Iranians was at the other institute that I was working at. I had some back pay coming, and unfortunately the check didn't arrive until the last day I was there, and the banks were closed. But my Iranian colleagues all pooled the cash they had to cover the check and gave me the cash and took the check. And I don't know to this day whether they were able to cash it or not. So those two incidences, to me at least, portray how generous and how concerned Iranians are to visitors to their country.
But I would like to add that how delighted I was for Pat to get back pay. Because it was our intention at the embassy to buy tickets for the 6 diplomats. That is, a ticket on SAS, a ticket on Swissair, and a ticket on British Airways. A ticket for each one in case the planes they were going on didn't take off. We had money come in cash every week through the diplomatic bag, but I didn't have enough at that one moment in time to buy the airplane tickets. So Pat came in and said, I've got some back pay. I said, I'm delighted. Congratulations, could I have it? She said, what for? And I said, I'm going to buy some airline tickets. She said, well, here, yes, okay. I said, don't worry. Pat, to this day, claims I haven't paid her back. But
he hasn't. And what I demand now is that amount of money plus the interest. So probably he'll never be able to pay it back.
So are we to decide that the film is really based on a story that's too good to get it, and the facts shouldn't get in the way?
I think that's well put by an investigative reporter.
And Mr. Affleck, did he ever ask you anything about the story?
Not about the story, but when it first opened, there was a great uproar in Canada about our not having gone to the opening in Toronto. So, Ken?
So there was a concern, a sense in Canada that some of the descriptions in the press, as we talked about earlier, though, that Canadian history is being rewritten. So after a couple of days, I got a phone call, and it said, Ambassador Taylor, Ken Taylor. I said, yes, it's Ben. I'm thinking, I don't know any Ben. But I said, oh, yes, of course. How is Hollywood? He says, fine. He said, I understand you Canadians have some issues. And I said, yes, we do. And he said, well, eventually, to make a long story short, Pat and I flew out to Los Angeles. We had a long talk with Time Warner, with Ben Affleck, who's very affable, very understanding. And the movie's made. There's nothing you can do about that. But the caption was suggested, in fact, emphatically said, that the Canadians undeservedly took credit for the departure of the six, and it was only after the U.S. released the classified documents that it became clear that it was totally the work of the CIA, and really the Canadian citations weren't earned. I said, well, that's pretty profoundly offensive to Canadians. And Canadians are master of the understatement. But he said, well, it's going to cost money, but we'll change it. And so he changed it, and I put together a few lines, and that was the final caption, which one way or the other maybe added an interpretation to it. But in one sense, the value of the movie, the authentic representation it brings to some degree of the realities of diplomatic life abroad, I think certainly served a purpose, particularly to U.S. citizens, given the case and the tragedy of Benghazi, that this is the nature that men and women in the U.S. Foreign Service particularly face serving abroad today in countries where the people, the citizens, have aspirations for a different type of country, and that engendering not only a revolution, but the unrest or the tumultuous days. So diplomacy, and also your profession, journalists, these days face a very risky existence in a dangerous neighborhood. And the movie, in that sense, I think, illustrates that and puts forward in a very forceful way the realities of diplomacy today.
So, in your careers, over all these years, who are your real heroes? Not your Hollywood heroes, but your real heroes.
Well, I think I have two people I really admire, and they're not in the diplomatic service. They're in the scientific world, and both Nobel laureates. One is an Australian, Sir Macfarlane Burnet, on whose papers are still based a lot of our beliefs and studies on what we call immunology. That's the body's reaction to an assault by foreign objects. And the other person is Dr. Fred Robbins, who also received the Nobel laureate for his participation in the development of the polio vaccine. Dr. Burnet gave me my first chance in training at the Walter and Eliza Hall Institute in Melbourne, where he was director. And Dr. Fred Robbins I've known for quite some time, and he was just an inspiration. He just had a wide view of biological science, and he was a very understated gentleman.
I think the first is not too surprising. That is Lester Pearson, who was the Canadian Prime Minister during the 60s. I won't be biased here, Bob, just because he went to University of Toronto as well. But he was a scholar. He was in World War II. He played semi-professional baseball. He graduated. He taught at university. He was a diplomat. And then as foreign minister, he won the Nobel Prize for enduring resolution and some sort of settlement of the Suez Crisis. He went on to become a politician, a reluctant politician, but became prime minister. And he also had the foresight and the depth to look for a successor, which is a number of people wanted to themselves without that. And of course, his successor was Pierre Trudeau, which again was a statesman in Canadian terms. The other individual is quite a different one, a citizen of Pakistan, Hashim Khan. Now, Hashim Khan was a world champion squash player year after year. And the New Yorker magazine did an article in the early 60s saying that he could be considered the world's finest athlete after World War II. And Hashim Khan grew up in a small village in nearby Rawalpindi in northern Pakistan during World War II. The British soldiers played squash, and he, from the age of whatever you could walk, was a ball boy. So that was his start in squash. He then became a world champion. He saw that his nephew, his grandsons, and what have you, were one way or the other encouraged to pursue the same sport. One of them ended up as squash coach at Harvard, the other a squash coach in Canada, and of the family, 5 nephews who were ranked in the top 15 squash players. I got to know him in Detroit when I took up squash. I pretended to have games with Hashim Squash. The only thing is he had this innate ability to stand in the middle of the court and return every shot I could come up with. So, but he remained, he had pride in his country. He saw himself as being given an opportunity, and he reflected a character not only of his country, but of the best of professional sport. And to me, he's a unique individual and one that I would have hoped I would have had some of his qualities.
And I'd like to ask you, like, after meeting all these people, after all of these experiences, you seem to come back, whether it's in New York or in Berkeley, to the IHouse, to its supporting it, to holding events, to showing up. Why?
Well, the IHouse, I think, is a unique place, as has been eloquently described by people before me. It's like traveling the world without having to go out the front door. And the thing that I learned, particularly from being here, is that in spite of all the differences in culture and skin color, language, everyone is the same. Everyone is a person, and their aspirations are all the same. They all want to lead a good life. They want to act for the betterment of their own country. They want to have their families safe. And to me, that characterizes what IHouse does for someone staying here.
Yeah, I think it's an opportunity to look beyond your country's borders. And particularly speaking of our own country, Canada, we've got a lot of geography and not many people. So our future, to a large extent, rests beyond our borders. And certainly, IHouse introduces you to the realities of your country for you, your realities of living outside your own country. And in a sense, gives you an opportunity to look at your country from a different perspective, which I think is what you want to seek. And IHouse, in that sense, is really essentially a global entity, even though, as Pat says, you don't need to go out the front door.
Well, on behalf of the University of California here at Berkeley and the IHouse, I want to congratulate you on this presentation and being able to visit with you this evening. Thank you very much.